On this video, we return to Rosenberg in his next expert level farming game, Hallertau. Is this the next big Euro of 2020, or have we seen this all before? Let's find out in some more detail. Hi, I'm Luke Hector from the Broken Meeple, and if this is your first time checking out my channel, I'd love it if you could check out the rest of my videos on reviews, top 10s and more besides, and if you like what you see, please consider subscribing. And if the game I'm reviewing today takes your fancy, then consider acquiring it from zatu.co.uk, where you can use my code right there in order to get 5% off your basket on any number of games that you stick in it. If there's a hole on your shelf and you think it needs filling with a game for Christmas, then consider grabbing one now. Hallertau returns us to the land of Bavaria. We are farming just about every resource on the planet here. In order to develop our village, we are using a worker placement system to take various actions that allow us to gather fields, grow crops and all sorts in order to eventually develop our village and build up our own community centre. In terms of gathering points, which obviously is the name of the game here, you've essentially got two main ways to do it. Firstly, you have your community centre. You've got 5 different buildings on the board that you are trying to move along by contributing the various resources that you need for it. The more that you can contribute in a particular round though, the more you're going to require the use of tools in order to move these little boulder pieces along the way so that you can move them as far as you can. The further you move them, eventually you can move your community centre a little bit more on the board, which will eventually get you more workers, more points, and as I say, they do score you quite a bit of points at the end of the game if you focus on it. Alternatively, you can go more down a card-focused route. You have different cards, you'll start with some in the game, but you'll be able to gather more as time goes on, and these are essentially meet a condition, get a reward. This could be that you need to spend certain resources, or it could mean that you just need to have so many of them in your possession. They will gain you some kind of bonus, they might allow you to pick up other bonus cards, and there's a lot of cards. You've got gateway cards, which are essentially designed to jumpstart your economy. You've got 1 of 4 different decks, which are kind of supposed to be tailor-made to certain areas, although we'll get onto that in a bit more detail later. You've got a deck of bonus cards, which means that if you can meet the condition, you can get a bonus at certain points during the round. And of course, you've got the all, like, what do you expect, point cards, where basically you score endgame points if you meet, again, certain conditions. Each one of the 20 spaces on the worker placement board has 3 different slots for action cubes. Essentially, the first one will cost you 1 cube, next one 2, and the next one 3, depending how many people have gone there. And only so many will get returned at the end of a round. Players have their own little player board where their fields are micromanaged, where the crops are put onto those fields in order to grow them into more crops. And of course you can then use cards at any point during the entire game, it doesn't even matter if it's your turn, you can play them to conjure off various bonuses and combos in order to jumpstart your economy in order to fulfill the primary goal of satisfying those point cards or building up your little village. The game carries on in this fashion for 6 rounds, at which point you total up all the points that everybody's earned and have a guess what happens for the person who has the most.
Of course!
So getting into some further details, let's start with duration, and there's an interesting time frame on the box there. It says 50 to 140 minutes. That's different. It's essentially saying 20 minutes plus 30 minutes per player, but you tend to see everybody do 60 to 120. It's different that they decide to go down that route. But that's pretty accurate actually for a time frame. And I mean, I know it's a wide time frame, but that's kind of what you would expect from this game. You are talking about an hour to play the solo when you know what you're doing, and then after that you are looking at about 90 minutes, 2 hours, and potentially 2.5 hours if you go to 4 players. If you put anybody with analysis paralysis in this game though, you could easily see this going up to 3 hours with a 4-player game, though those are going to be rare circumstances. You should be able to keep this to about a 2.5 hour frame, so it's more in line with Rosenberg heavy games of the past. The setup of the game doesn't take too long either, providing you follow this one tip. Don't separate out all the resources. There are so many resources in this game, I think there's at least 10, and if you try to bag them all up separately, then put them in individual cases like most of us like to do with a lot of these resource management games, you will drag the setup time to this to ridiculous levels. Literally just merge all the tokens together and put them in one giant pile. Trust me, you're not going to need that many of them during the game, and you will find it a lot easier. It will probably shave you off a good 5-10 minutes of the setup time just by piling them in one big lump. Trust me, it's worth it. The biggest issue that hurts this from a duration standpoint though is what I mentioned about the analysis paralysis. I know that it's rare that you should go up to the 3-hour mark, but analysis paralysis can be a big issue with this game. Not necessarily because of the worker placement aspect, that bit's relatively straightforward. The problem though comes with the community center that you're sort of moving across the board at the top. You have to convert various resources into those buildings, 5 buildings, in order to move them along this player board that you have. The only thing is, when you get to that point, it becomes a major arithmetic exercise in order to work out, okay, so I need more bricks than I need barley on this one, so I'll spend 2 of those, and if I get 5 goods this round, then I get a discount of 1 good, so then on this bakehouse I can put down barley and wheat, and on this one I can put down wheat and milk. I've got 5 milk, 1 meat, so I do a bit of each, maybe 1 meat, maybe I just do all milk.
Oh no, I've gone cross-eyed.
And the exercise of converting at the end of a round becomes such a chore for some people that it will cause a lot of people to take a while on that phase. Either ease of play, is it easy to grok despite the fact it has expert level written on the backs? It's actually not that bad. The rulebook is fairly lengthy and it is fairly text heavy, and it may scare you at first, but stick with it. What you need to do is basically sit down with this game and just devote a little bit of time and a little bit of peace and quiet to it. There's enough pictorial examples in here that you shouldn't have too many rules that are actually ambiguous or hard to follow, and I just basically started at the beginning, worked my way through it, and had the stuff in front of me, and I actually got it quite well. If you've played any of his fare before, you'll get this fine. I didn't think there was anything in here that was particularly complex, with the exception of one dumb rule that they had in the setup, where it basically says, oh, you can set your workers up this way, and then in colored italic text it says, in so many players do this and so many players do this, but then don't do phase 1 of the game. And the idea is that it's trying to merge those 2 bits together in order to speed the setup a bit. The problem is it's written so poorly in the rulebook as to how that works that it just confused me, and lo and behold, go on to Board Game Geek, there's a thread with the exact same question. But most of this rulebook is just text on the back for reference aids. You've seen his other fare before where you've got a million cards and a million tiles, and one thing that I do love is that they do detailed explanations of all of those various cards and tiles. So literally all you've got to do is find the deck, find the number, so here we go, expert deck 222, you can only play this in phase 4 and blah blah blah, and it tells you. So you should not ever have to look online for the FAQ because it's pretty much already in here. So all in all, pretty good on the ease of play front. It's not that difficult to grasp for an expert level game. I found that I literally only needed about 20 minutes with the rulebook, and yeah, I felt pretty good. Your first game is going to be a learning game for sure, particularly with the whole conversion aspect, because that's a bit of a mind bender in order to get your head around. But other than that, I found this just as easy to learn as most of his other heavy stuff like Caverna and, Le Havre and stuff like that. In fact, I dare say this one's actually a little bit easier. On top of that, you've got some really good reference aid boards to use in front of you that go through all 10 phases. And like I say, 10 phases sounds like a lot, but only 2 of them are you actually doing a lot of meat here. The rest of them are just maintenance. And what I love about these reference aids, publishers, take note of this. The reference aid has got iconography version on one side, flip it over and it's got it all in text. Brilliant. More publishers need to do this. It's great, because not everybody learns by pictures. Some people learn by text. And for your first game, I recommend you use the text side, because then it's all detailed out for you. Once you're more comfortable with the game and you just need a quick mind reminder, then great, flip it to its iconography side and you should be good. But that works so well, it helped me in my games, and other publishers start doing this.
Everybody got that?
For T, we move on to tactics and strategy, and bit hit and miss when we get to this part, unfortunately. The idea is that the majority of this game revolves around the use of the cards and moving this community centre along. It's an odd mechanic to say the least, but more on that later. But one thing I got from this game was that it felt like more of the same, but not in the best way. We've played Agricola, we've played Caverna, I've played Fields of Arle, I've played several of his farming games. I haven't even played them all. I've still yet to play Aura and the Borer and 1 or 2 others. But still, oh yeah, Nooseford, I played that, wasn't a big fan. But when I played this one, nothing in it seemed particularly unique. It's like, we've seen this before, and a lot of it is airlifted from other games. We've seen the whole farming mechanic before. We've done Agricola and Caverna. Okay, we're fine with that. The worker placement, nothing new, except you're using cubes. I mean, first it was discs, now it's cubes. And then also the markers that you use to track what crops you've got is taken straight out of Cave versus Cave, the 2-player version, where you've got a track 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you put a marker on it, and then you move it up and down to say how much you've got. It condenses the board in a way, but it's also a little annoying, because if you end up with more than 5 of something, you've got to use multiple markers. One will be at 5, one will be at 3, one will be at 2. And you sort of go, well, I'll merge those, and I need to spend 2 here, so I'll move that one down by 1, that one down by 2. Well, and it can get a little bit fiddly. Bear in mind, you've got about 10 different resources that you could be farming here, and you'll probably need at least 3/4 of those in order to do well at this game, because you need a variety of stuff. The community center part as well, I find that just to be really fiddly, and an odd mechanic in the sense. I mean, I don't get why you've got these little boulders that you've got to move along, you know, we'll get onto that in a little bit more detail later, but, you know, literally all you're doing is just going, at the end of a round, I'll just trade all this stuff in, and these buildings will move slightly, and then this moves after it. Feels like a really generic mechanic, and as I said, it causes people to freeze like crazy, because trying to work out the discounts and what goods you need to spend takes people forever, because depending what round you're on, it costs more and more goods as time goes on. But if you, at certain rounds, you could spend 3 different goods, you'll get a discount of 2 goods, you get a discount of 1, and when you're trying to factor that in, when the buildings use similar resources across them, it can become a bit of a chore to do so. But things do perk up a bit when you get to use the cards, but it's a bit of a double-edged sword. The cards are pretty neat. I like these cards in these farming games. You know, you get to find all these different bonuses that you can grab and maybe develop a different path to victory as time goes on. And here you've got ultimate flexibility, because you can literally play a card anytime, anywhere. You know, some of them may have the occasional restriction as to what phase you do, but there's not many of them, and they're pretty specific, and you'll generally find them in the expert level decks anyway. The cards do work nicely in that respect. But, and here's the big problem I have with the cards, they're far too swingy. There's a ton of them. There is a lot of them in this game, and they, you know, you don't really know what bonuses and that you're going to pick up. The thing is, it's complete luck of the draw as to which cards you get. There's no face-up tableau or anything. It's literally you spend an action, which could cost you 1 if not 2 cubes, which is, you know, 1 cube's not bad, but 2 cubes? That's risky. You draw the card, and you hope it's good. But one player might have a ton of barley and rye, and then they pick up 2 cards, and they both require you to just have in possession a bunch of barley and rye. Oh sweet, I can instantly play this and get a bonus, which gets me more stuff, which allows a kind of rich get richer feel. But then I might have a bunch of milk and meat, and I draw a card that says get 7 fields. Well, I've only got 3, it's going to take me a while to get 4 more fields. Alright, I'll draw another card. Have a bucket ton of clay. Well, I've got milk and meat and barley. I don't have a ton of clay. Whereas somebody else literally just drew exactly what they needed, and it was exactly what they want. Now, this happens in a lot of games where you've got to draw cards through, you know, luck of the draw, but a lot of those games are 60-minute games. This is, unless you're playing it solo, usually 90 minutes to 2.5 hours. This is supposed to be an expert level game, and yet some players may literally just get ahead because of the fact that they drew decent cards. So moving on to A for aesthetics, does it look good? Do you get a lot for your money? Well, you certainly get a lot. I mean, this is a bag that I've put literally just player pieces in. So you've got a fair amount just for your player board, but you end up with so many resources here. I mean, trying to look in this bag and count them all. Barley, rye, wool, milk. Did I do hops already? No. Clay, leather, milk, have I done that one? Yeah, there's a lot of resources here, and then you've also got tools and the worker placement cubes on top, of which you get a bucket load of them anyway. And then cards, there's a lot of them. I mean, that's just a few of the cards. Here's more cards. Here's more cards. And then here's a ton, and I mean a ton, of boards. This is insane. Look at this. The amount of boards here. Woo! Yeah. When was the last time you saw this many boards in a game? It's kind of ridiculous. Especially when one of them is literally just the community center board. It's got a tiny little cutout where you see how many workers you get, and it slides along your player board. That's literally all this does, and yet it's another full-on board. This certainly does have a fair bit of table presence when you set it up and it gets going. But all in all, it's not too bad in terms of its production quality. I mean, you get the wooden resource tokens, which are sculpted in different colors. I like. The boards themselves are good quality. In fact, the only negative I have with the production quality is that the artwork is kind of so-so. I like some of it, but I don't like all of it. The artwork on the board, particularly the worker placement board, is a bit basic and bland and not great. The cards themselves don't really have any major artwork on them. They're just essentially functional in terms of what, like, the face-up side of it. But I do love the artwork on the back of the cards, where you've got the gateways, the different buildings and stuff. They look really nice. I wish I could have seen that art on more of this game, but like I say, it's still pretty good. It's colourful, it's got lots of wooden bits. Just like most of these farming games, there's not a lot bad to speak of here. I for Immersion, is it a good theme? Is it solid? Are you immersed in it? This is where it takes a bit of a hit as well. I mean, yeah, you've got that farming aspect, but it doesn't feel quite as strong a theme as, say, in Agricola or Caverna. Here, yeah, you are farming, even though you've got, like, the markers tracked up and that, but you essentially just get an empty field, plonk anything on it, and then it grows the exact same turn. Sheep, you get sheep, they produce wool and milk, and then they die off of natural causes after a while, but you can somehow extend their life through a basic worker placement action. It doesn't actually tell you how you extend their life. You just go on an action space that gets you a wool and says a sheep gets to extend by 1 round. Okay, I mean, are we fixing these sheep up with steroids? What? I'm not entirely sure. But where the theme kind of kills for me is this whole community center bit. That just feels like something I would expect out of a Feld game.
We're sorry.
Nothing about it really feels like I'm developing my village. It's just a board with a bunch of columns. You've got the 5 buildings that you're trying to convert and the community center behind it. And basically, if you move all 5 buildings, this thing will follow it. So that's essentially what you're doing. You're just moving a superfluous board on a track. But then you've also got these boulders in the way. On the columns, like the 2nd and 4th column after the buildings, you've got a boulder, and if you want to move the building any further, you've got to spend a tool to shift the boulder, 2 tools after that because there's 2 boulders, and then as soon as the round ends, you reset it so that the boulders are 2 and 4 spaces away from you again. Why? Why do you have to reset the boulders? That doesn't make any sense to me. And even then, I don't feel like I'm developing a village. I feel like I've just got this one building here that just seems to be moving along while I mess around with these tracks and columns. For me, the theme here is nowhere near as strong as previous farming games. I mean, you want a thematic farming game, like one that really feels like you're doing the works, then I would give respect to Agricola. It's not my favourite of the lot because I think it's too punishing and restricted, but I give props to Agricola for a really solid theme. Caverna does a good job of it as well, and Fields of Arle, probably my favourite of Uwe Rosenberg games of all time. That's got a lot of theme with the amount of stuff you're doing in it, but this one just felt more abstracted. I didn't feel like I was really doing anything that interesting per se. It kind of gave me a similar like bad vibe as Newsfjord, I can't pronounce that properly, but that one to me felt very generic. So does this one. L for longevity, is the game going to have a lot of replay value? Well, you would think with those cards it would. Yes and no. Yes, there's a ton of cards. You've got 4 different levels of gateway cards. You've got 4 different farmyard decks, which are just basically additional gateway cards that you can throw in. They're supposed to be differentiated, but frankly you wouldn't notice the difference. You've then got 1 deck of bonus cards and 1 deck of point cards, so those 2 aren't particularly varied. There's definitely a step up in complexity for some of those gateway cards, so you can play the beginner version or you can play the expert version. I think eventually you're going to want to play at least the advanced version of those cards, because the beginner ones are very basic, like a little too basic in order to make them interesting. But of course that will just come down with experience. The farmyard decks seem like a wasted effort though. They're supposedly like a hops deck and a barley deck and a sheep deck, but if you look through the cards you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. You know, you might get a few extra cards in that deck that are geared towards what it says, so like, oh, the hops deck, yeah, there's a few cards that are devoted to hops, more than usual. But there's still the other stuff in there. It's not like it completely denies anything else. So if you were to just hand me a deck and I was just to play with it, if I didn't know what the picture was on the back of it, I wouldn't be able to tell it was the Hops deck or the Sheep deck. They just don't feel particularly different. Now you can go into a solo mode though, and to be honest, this game might as well just be a solo game. I mentioned that there's tension for the spaces in multiplayer, but that's literally the only thing that affects multiplayer. I mean, I didn't play with the expert level cards. Maybe there's something in there I don't know, but as far as I can tell, there isn't from just browsing through them. But for the vast majority of this game, there's no reason to have other players. Literally, it's just tension for worker placement spots, and in lower player counts, particularly solo, there's already a methodology for that. You basically flip over this card that puts and takes off cubes on certain quadrants of the board, depending on what the card is flipped. So you've pretty much just substituted the multiplayer element with a small deck of tiny cards. So in summary, Hallertau is a fine game, but a bit disappointing as well. I didn't think it had anything particularly new about it. I have got Caverna and Fields of Arle on my shelf. I give respect to Agricola, and I've played other Uwe Rosenberg games. This one just felt like another Uwe Rosenberg game. Like nothing like, oh, this has got this new thing that's going to make it stand out amongst the crowd. No, it just is another game. It's set in Bavaria again, you know, most of his other ones are. It's still the same farming stuff. Most of the mechanics, in fact I'd say all of the mechanics, are airlifted from other Uwe Rosenberg games. It just doesn't really have anything to stand out. That's not to say it's a bad game mechanically though. The card combos are still interesting to do, it does flow very smoothly when you get the hang of the rules, and it is still fun to do a farming style Euro game with all of these different resources. You know, the theme may not be quite as strong as you would like, but it's still fun to do that aspect, and in a solo mode it essentially becomes a big puzzle game of trying to use the workers' placement spaces in conjunction with the cards that you've got. But then you do have the swinging nature of the cards where you could literally just draw into the luckiest combo possible and win the game that way, which can really be downheartening, especially if you're playing this 4-player in a 2.5-hour version. So Hallertau still gets credit from me, but not enough to give it a seal of endorsement. This one I'm giving a 6 out of 10 overall. I would play this game, but it's not one I'm going to keep. It's not one that I think is going to, you know, be one that I recommend over other Uwe Rosenberg games. If somebody wants to play it and it's on the table, I'll play it and I'll probably still get enjoyment out of it, but it just felt generic. Nothing particularly new, nothing particularly different, just here's a bunch of cards, but you can play them at any time now. Whoopee. You know, here's some farming resources, but now you've got 10 instead of 5. Okay, but we've seen that before. This won't stand out from the crowd. I can't imagine anybody coming along to this game and thinking, this will be my favourite Uwe Rosenberg game. I would like to imagine that there'll be people who play this and go, oh, this is enjoyable, I like it, and probably give it an 8, 9 out of 10. But I'd be hard-pressed to think that anyone's going to pick this up and go, out of Caverna, Agricola, Arle, Loyang, Oren Labora, all these other Uwe Rosenberg games, that this is going to be the one that stands out above all the crowd? I just can't see it really. But, as I say, different strokes for different folks. That's just what I think. 6 out of 10, fine, just not particularly great either. It's an above-average Euro game. Now I hope you've enjoyed watching this Broken Meeple video, but I'm not the only creator out there who's producing video content based on board games. There's a ton of creators that you should be giving a watch, and I don't just mean the ones at the top who everybody has heard about. They get 100,000 views every video. I'm talking about those small creators who are just as passionate as everybody about board games, but they get left by the wayside, swept under the carpet, and sadly people just don't notice them. But they're all great people, they're friendly people, they deserve your views as well. So start off by watching this channel and consider a subscription.
Hi, my name's Andy Savage and I have a board game channel called One Man and His Meeple, where I do full solo playthroughs with a dash of strategy talk. No setup, no lengthy rules explanations, no reviews, just straight into the game. Here you'll find medium to heavyweight games played with the official rules, unofficial variants, 2 or 3 handed against myself, or sometimes online. If solo is your thing, or if you want to know if solo gaming might be something you could get into, then why not check it out?
So that's it from me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see and I've entertained you enough, then click the avatar in the centre to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and check out my recent uploads or a personal video suggested by me. Until next time, as remember guys, it's only a game.